Hello, I'm Laura Sellier, and you're watching Inside the Americas, coming up in the programme. As President Obama tells a divided Congress to back him on immigration reform, we meet those stranded in Mexico. Plus, a new maritime border for Peru and Chile, but is it a fair deal for both sides? And saying farewell to one of the world's most famous protest singers. Tributes pour in for Pete Seeger, who died this week at the age of 94. First, work with me or I will act alone. Barack Obama had a warning for Congress this week as he made his State of the Union address. The US president vowed to tackle income inequality and said he wanted to restore America's reputation as the land of opportunity. Obama's had a tough year. The launch of his flagship healthcare reform was marred by technical problems, and Republicans have refused to back him in several key areas. With approval ratings now at an all-time low, he's looking to secure his legacy. Catherine Viette has the story.
Let's make this a year of action.
U.S. President Barack Obama signaled he's not giving up on advancing key programs like fighting income inequality and immigration reform. Stymied by political gridlock the last 2 years, the president put Congress on alert.
But America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I can take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do.
A big portion of his speech was devoted to the economy. He pledged to speed growth and strengthen the middle class. He announced plans to tackle the wage gap between men and women and to raise the federal minimum wage.
In the coming weeks, I will issue an executive order requiring federal contractors to pay their federally funded employees a fair wage of at least $10.10 an hour, because if you cook our troops' meals or wash their dishes, you should not have to live in poverty.
Turning to foreign policy, Obama touched on Afghanistan, saying the war will formally conclude at the end of this year. He also addressed the crisis in Syria and negotiations with Iran.
If Iran's leaders do not seize this opportunity, then I will be the first to call for more sanctions and stand ready to exercise all options to make sure Iran does not build a nuclear weapon.
Facing some of the lowest approval ratings of his presidency and the prospect of a continued divided government, Obama is seeking other ways to enact his agenda.
Well, Obama also urged Congress to act on immigration. But as the politicians argue it out, it's unlikely to make a difference to the many migrants trying to make it across the border from Latin America. We take you now to the Mexican border town of Tijuana, where would-be migrants are forced to endure horrendous living conditions, sleeping in holes and sewage pipes in a dried-out canal bed.
Locals call it El Purgatorio, purgatory. This stretch of canal on the US-Mexico border is their home. They live in underground bunkers and sewage pipes. Most are migrants who've been deported from the United States and dropped off just across the border in Tijuana. This is where Julio Garcia lives.
Es la mejor de todas.
It's the nicest home in the whole canal.
His front door is a trapdoor.
Mi casa es tu casa.
My house is your house. Here's where we put our clothes. Here's the hi-fi. There's no electricity, but it works with batteries. This stuff belongs to the lady. Behind you is the bedroom.
Julio spent 27 years living illegally in the United States. He was deported a few months ago.
I call it the refuge. When the Mexican police chase us, we disappear underground like spiders. We hide away like rabbits.
Julio is one of hundreds of deportees who've made their homes on this stretch of cement. Some have lived so long in the US, they no longer have personal ties in Mexico. Others have been outcast by their families. For the local police, they're a growing worry.
A migrant isn't a problem, but a migrant who hasn't found work after 10 days and who doesn't have any money, generally that migrant will turn to drugs.
Many of the canal's residents develop drug addictions and get caught up in the infamous drug cartels. The police regularly patrol here. This woman lives in a tunnel once used to move sewage.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, how about you?
Are you alone?
Yes, I'm alone.
This has been Beatrice Riviera's home since she left prison in the US. To get inside, she has to slide under the gate.
That's the only way.
Judging by the number of beds, at least 5 or 6 people live here. They fled when the police arrived.
There's a guy, you look, there he is. He saw us and he hid once again. In this places happens a lot of crimes, a lot of drug selling. They even rape women sometimes.
Do you use needles?
No, I don't.
Let me see.
Next to a bed, the police find a stash of needles and heroin. Raw sewage, toxic chemicals, flash flooding and gang warfare. 2 to 3 times a week, the police find a dead body in the canal.
There was a moment of silence for the late Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez this week as 33 Latin American nations met for talks in Cuba. And Chavez would have approved of the theme at CELAC, or the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, because it was all about fighting poverty, inequality and hunger. And the region certainly has its work cut out. The UN says almost 30% of Latin Americans live in poverty, more than 11% in extreme poverty. Cuba's President Raúl Castro told the summit that members had the natural resources to stamp out poverty, but lacked the political will. The UN's highest court set a maritime boundary between Chile and Peru this week. The result? Chile gets to keep its rich fishing grounds, but Peru gets a bigger chunk of the Pacific Ocean. This ruling marks the end of a decades-old dispute between the neighbours. Claire Murphy has the detail.
Peruvians in the capital Lima have been celebrating. On Monday, the International Court of Justice in The Hague decided a maritime border dispute dating back to the late 19th century. And the land of the Incas has come out on top over its southern neighbour. After 6 years of legal wrangling, the ICJ has allowed Chile keep coastal fishing grounds, but Peru gets a big piece of the Pacific.
El Perú puede sentirse satisfecho.
Peru can feel satisfied with the work accomplished that has allowed the recognition of sovereign rights over a maritime area of around 50,000 square kilometres, which represents more than 70% of the total of our request.
The case filed by Peru in 2008 was a matter of national pride. Many Chileans, though, have minimised the defeat, claiming their fishermen don't operate in the zone lost. But the country's president said the decision was lamentable.
Chile will maintain full freedom of sea and air transport in this area, but it is undoubtedly a loss to our country.
The verdict relates to one of the most valuable fishing grounds in the world, the annual catch worth an estimated $200 million. But analysts say Chile hasn't in fact done that badly. Its bountiful waters close to the shore are unaffected. The judge's line, drawn from 80 nautical miles off Chile's northern border, runs southwest until 200 nautical miles, with Peru handed the ocean to the north. The ruling can't be appealed and requires both countries to voluntarily implement it. This is highly likely, as aside from the high emotions over this maritime dispute, the states have cordial ties and an ever-increasing economic interdependence, with annual trade between the two now $4.3 billion annually. But the work of the ICJ is not yet complete. Bolivia is now set to ask the court to examine its demand to once more access the sea, a grievance that also dates back to the end of the Pacific War over 100 years ago.
And finally, tributes have been pouring in for the folk singer Pete Seeger, who died this week at the age of 94. Seeger gained fame with the Weavers back in 1948, but continued to perform solo in a career that spanned 6 decades. In the 1950s, his left-leaning politics earned him a place on a government blacklist. But right till the end, Seeger was a keen activist who championed issues from nuclear disarmament to the recent Occupy Wall Street movement. Claire Williams looks back at a long and remarkable career.
Iconic songs, unforgettable lyrics. Pete Seeger was a much-loved American folk singer. He was also a legendary political and social activist.
I tell people nobody can prove a thing, but obviously if I didn't think music could help save the human race, I wouldn't be making music.
Born in 1919 in New York, he came from musical stock. His mother was a concert violinist, his father a musicologist. Seeger joined the Young Communist League as a student at Harvard in the 1930s, and he soon began singing for trade union causes. The young musician went on to form the Weavers in 1948, but the band's political views meant they were blacklisted in the 1950s McCarthy era. They were banned from television, radio, and many concert halls. Seeger continued to strongly believe activism needed a soundtrack.
If you love your Uncle Sam, bring him home.
In the 1960s, he re-emerged onto the public scene as a prominent singer of protest music in support of nuclear disarmament, civil rights, and against the war in Vietnam. He popularized folk music and helped launch careers for the likes of Joan Baez and Bob Dylan by founding the Newport Folk Festival. Seeger made over 100 albums. Dozens of his songs and covers have become cult classics in and outside the United States. Even in his 90s, he continued to campaign against an issue close to home, pollution in the Hudson River.
Well, that's it for this edition of Inside the Americas. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like more detail on any of the reports you've seen covered here, do go to our website, www.france24.com.